John Walsh. Here. We have four present.
Thank you very much. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you all stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The next item is the approval of the minutes from October 5th. You've all received them in your emails. Anyone have any comments, questions, concerns? Okay. Anyone want to make a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Thank you, Chuck.
Second.
Second, Don. Thank you. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda, part of number 3, is that there were some corrections to the September 16th meeting minutes. The date at the top of the minutes was incorrect, and there was also a person listed as both present and absent. But Marilyn was going to fix that, so we are all set with that. The next item is the Board of Education input. We invited the Board of Education here tonight to talk to us about their needs as far as the educational objectives for this project. So I think there's a presentation that Dr. Solon is going to be producing for us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Good evening, everybody. What a warm welcome. New school facilities. So really, I think when we think about constructing a school, hopefully we're revamping our schools. I mean, it's just like anything else. You have to understand the purpose of the facility to understand what you want to do for the facility, what you want the facility to look like and be like. I'm not going to go through some of these slides that I won't read them verbatim to you, I should say, but I appreciate that they'd be kind of hard to read in the back, but there is a printout for you to see them as well. But for us, it starts with what are our goals as a school system? And we break that down into 3 key components. The student as a thinker, learner, kind of is, that is an individual. We want them to be capable of being creative and applying complex thought, first and foremost. We want them to be collaborators. It's a core foundational goal of what we do. They need to be able to exchange ideas with one another, evaluate the quality of those ideas, and create new ideas. We also want them to be responsible citizens of the world, have cultural understanding, understand how they can influence society at large, or the world. Today it's much easier. We live in a very small planet with social media and technology that have broad and vast influence. How will our students be able to do that? At the heart of what we do are the check and performance standards. These I will read because I think they're that critical to what we do. Complex thinking, creative thinking, self-directed learning, effective communication, collaborative cooperative learning, and community contributors. So again, it goes back to the idea of we need to make sure that our facilities can deliver on these goals, right, at the end of the day. So what does a future learning environment look like that aligns with those goals, those things that we're trying to develop in our students? So we need to have opportunities for collaboration, breakout spaces. We need to focus on flexible grouping during lessons and be able to spread out. So you may remember your high school experience where everybody sat in rows. Maybe periodically you got to sit in groups and work on a project, scoot your desk around or whatever. The world that we're trying to design are multiple groups, perhaps within an 8-minute block period. We need to be able to move around, have station work. Today, this group needs support with a particular standard. Well, this group works on something else. We're constantly evolving to try and deliver the most personalized instructional experience possible. Meet students where they are and build. We need to provide opportunities for application, building, creating, deconstructing things. I'll have some visuals that kind of illustrate this, but things like greenhouses. I have to say, it's always been a personal, thorn in my side that we're the bedding plant capital of the world and our schools don't have quality functioning greenhouses. There's demand for that, there's an interest, but the one that we have at the high school is not ADA accessible. Machinery to support robotics, construction, and fabrication. Our board has worked on this in recent years. We can't fix all these problems overnight. And I absolutely respect that everybody in this room, all those that are, political authorities in the community, did not create the challenges that belie us today. We've inherited them, and I appreciate that this group is dedicated the time to working on them. We need contemporary science labs. When I was high school principal 8 years ago, Ben and I were looking at other science labs to be updated. So that's something that we're very sensitive to. We need to be able to differentiate to meet individual needs of students. I talked about that flexible grouping. That's critical for us to continue to evolve as a school system. We need space for teacher conferencing. That's one of the ironic parts of the whole COVID-19, that computer conferencing is a little bit easier to do one-on-one. But when we return to a school in-person environment, we also need to be able to have spaces that can hold conferencing between students and between teachers and students. We need to have flexibility given the pace of change. If I can design you the best X, Y, or Z today, chances are it's probably going to be different 10 years from now. So we want to be able to maintain some flexibility in whatever it is that we come up with for a design. And ultimately, we need to consider the more sophisticated early childhood and special education needs. If you look at our buildings from 20 years ago to today, you will see the greatest change in those areas, aside from technology, of course. So special education, we have rooms dedicated to really unique needs. And that's because we have a core belief in our community that we want to retain as many students in our community as we can for many reasons. One, we think it's better for the child to be closer to home. We also can deliver services usually at a higher quality and better price than outplacement, particularly when you consider transportation. And the needs have changed, the needs have evolved. More sophisticated student needs, which used to be met through outplacement all the time, are now often met in our home schools. If you saw the Highland showcase last year, it's a perfect example. And same with early childhood education. We have a Smart Start program now. The early childhood education is an evolving trend in America and Connecticut. I wouldn't be shocked if it continues down that path, where there's a preschool mandate statewide. So, as some of our committee members will certainly remember, they went around and spent time, which was greatly appreciated, with our faculty and staff around the district. These were their early impressions of what the needs were. And, nobody had to be a soothsayer to tell that HVAC, it's going to be a priority need, it's going to continue to be a need. I think when they said it, back when they did, they were probably referencing air conditioning above all else, but then also temperature control, not necessarily thinking about air filtration the way that we would be thinking about it today. But as you, I'm sure, would hypothesize, this is a problem that's not going away. That we will continue to have to be sensitive and attuned to how do we filter air in our buildings, how do we circulate more fresh air into our buildings. Buildings that were built in 1950 50 didn't have to necessarily think about that the way they do today. Larger adaptable spaces for instruction, collaboration, space to accommodate large-scale meetings, like this, a space like this. Update science facilities, as I already spoke to. Additional storage. We want not just our staff, but I think our community wants spaces that are security conscious without being overbearing. And we could put, 2 armed police officers in every school, but we're preparing kids to go to a world that's not like that. And we could be creating more anxiety than necessary. We need to create the physical barriers in a well-designed way that don't necessarily feel like prison. And I'll be honest with you, you go into Dodd Middle School, there's a metal grate fence that runs between the doors. Because if you make a hard left, you could go right in through the vestibule, into the nurse's office, into the cafeteria. That's not the design look we're going for, penitentiary style or something. We need to consider that as we, continue to evolve at our schools. Natural light, I think it can be somewhat underestimated, whether you're talking about killing viruses, but just an environment to create a learning space, in a workspace. If you work in an interior cube where you don't see the light of day all day, it's a much different experience than if you can engage with natural light during the day. So something our faculty expressed. These are some examples of what I was basically talking about. A room that's very flexible, saturated natural light. The one on the left, not so natural light, or the one on the bottom, but certainly very flexible. You can see in this picture, there's more traditional style desk seating on the right, more space on the left for manipulatives, whether it be math manipulatives, engineering, things like creativity, construction, deconstruction. We talked about it, technology. Breakout spaces, the bottom left is actually middle school in Westport that I had visited as part of instructional rounds where I was giving feedback on the quality of instruction. But they had breakout spaces like that. It's neat. It's kind of like a little shed that when I took the picture when nobody was in it, but they had pull-out support in that little shed that was kind of out in the hallway. More breakout space. The left, actually both of these are Guilford High School. I know Sylvia and Rich and Matt and I all went. That's a view from the top when you enter the foyer, looking down. They have that kind of breakout space down below. On the right, they have little pods that are set off into like little squares, and that would be the back of the square. And it's wide enough though that you can bring 3 or 4 people out in the hall and provide support there, collaboration space. This I think is very unique, and for me, as the former Cheshire High School principal, it really resonated with me because this space here is a separate entry from the parking lot. It's kind of a side parking lot. This area here is gym space behind this wall. Behind this wall is theater and cafeteria space. They realized, not only is it collaborations, study hall space during the day, the multi-use benefits here are incredible. So you could clear this space out and run special activities. What they do, they found that they had so many local parents coming in at like 5 o'clock for all the youth basketball and stuff. The beauty is you can shut all this off from the rest of the school. That you have a secure campus at that point. And they were serving people like meals in here. culinary and their program were serving folks. I mean, it was just such a great use of the space, and it really was a benefit to the community. And I think that's one of the things that might get, I hope, not lost in this process, that these buildings that we have are community spaces. We don't have a large community center in our town. Our buildings are used nonstop, day and night. And if we're going to continue to commit to that, which I believe we are, then we need to design our facilities and be considerate of that moving forward in a way that's secure, inviting, and flexible to be able to leverage that. So some of the seating, variety of seating. You know, you might look at this a little bit and snicker today. How many of you 5 years ago saw like the idea of a standing desk and laughed at that? Now you see it kind of everywhere. For particularly a guy like me who, this is my preferred presentation style, walking all around and talking, like sitting in a room for the entire period may be torture. These seats provide some opportunity for kinesthetic release there. We want to be able, as a school system, to provide STEM activities, creation. Deep application is what we're here for. So, I mean, on the right, these are actual pictures from Cheshire High School. Left is a building design. The right is spawning fish that we do through a bio program. The bottom right is not a CPS photo, but it's like a Lego design program that we use. Mike Salamini can tell you this is our video studio. This is a student project where it's like, it's not full hydroponics, but he had rocks in here and was growing with a water pump. These are the application activities that we're working on now. We need to continue to make sure we can meet that demand as needs evolve. So, kind of at the close here, a couple of key points. What we're looking for, I think, as a school system, and I think the board would agree, facilities that are accessible, meet code and ADA compliance, they're healthy and comfortable. I think everybody in the community would probably agree with that. HVAC, to optimize the learning environment. The idea that we have to think about closing schools because it's literally almost 100 degrees on the second floor of Chapman or Dodd, things like that, are issues that we should be able to address in 2020. Facilities which provide space and resources for contemporary science, technology, engineering, arts, and math application. Excuse me, hitting puberty here. We need to be able to engage in application. We want our kids doing, creating, building, applying. Facilities which encourage collaborative experiences between students and adequate storage space. Things like that you may not necessarily think about, but as a community facility, cheer mats in buildings. If we have a park and rec center, that may be something that the youth cheer would leverage there, but we have to store mats at Cheshire High School, which is a real challenge, or at Dodd Middle School. Facilities which support community demand, building use, and I want to go beyond just using the building to being a good neighbor for our community, so that the traffic on Route 10 isn't backed up for miles, or you've got to plan your day around the Dodd pickup or Chapman drop off. It's part of being a good neighbor. The parking situations. Now, is that like the ultimate first priority? No, but these are considerations as we build and redesign our facilities. And then finally, enhancing security, as I already talked a little bit about. Now, it was been attributed to Benjamin Franklin, and basically the line that if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And the other item that I gave you besides the PowerPoint was, the off-reference South Windsor design. In their handout, right from the get-go, they talked about, what their phased plan would look like. And I'm not saying that, tomorrow we need to have this, but it's helpful. Sorry, guys. But it is important for us to think about what it is we want to do. Otherwise, it can be really enticing to chase the next, empty building that comes along, or, as a school system, for the last several years, we've been very committed to staying the course. We plotted the course, we stay the course, we find success. And, I would just encourage everybody here for us to be considerate of that. Think about what we're trying to get our kids to be able to do. The gap analysis is basically already been done with our facilities. As it relates to things like HVAC, security, access, space. How do we take our facilities, our property, our resources, and draw those two closer together and align them better? And we should have a plan for how to do that. And it sure isn't easy, but that's kind of like where we are. I'll certainly take any questions about anything I shared, or if anybody wants to share any perspectives on that, Rich.
Jeff, obviously, as we went around, we saw the staff, every single school had a great deal of needs. They're all very old. Looking as an educator, you and the board, what facilities right now are really hampering our educational program the most?
I think, they all have unique variables. So you look at Highland Elementary, for example, it's a little bit like, which child do you love the most? That question, because they're all unique and they have different strengths and weaknesses. If you look at Highland Elementary School, Highland is in the best position of all of our schools for HVAC. They have an air conditioning system. There is circulation of fresh air in the facility. So that's a plus there. But the space and resources available for collaborative work, for special education services. Our special education services, as many of you know, have evolved significantly. We showed the elementary showcase presentation here last year. That is a real demand issue here, a real shortfall we have here. You can drive down the street at Chapman, the HVAC and handicap accessibility is a real issue there. So as we're taking tents away because it's going to be, cold soon, we have to consider, well, do we clear out the gym and have kids walk upstairs with their meals, 8-year-olds, into the gym to be able to eat? What do we do with handicap accessibility? Have to take a child outside, or maybe we have to take over the library. The space there isn't great. So there's different strengths and needs to each building. I wouldn't say that none of our buildings are going to fall down tomorrow. They're safe in that respect. And I think our team, from the board all the way down, has done a great job trying to resource and plan our way to success. And we are successful by many measures. But if we don't address this facility need in 65-year-old average buildings, there will come a point where they are, either beyond repair or the cost of repair will be so substantial. That's why I say failing to plan is planning to fail. All of our buildings are just about the same age. We can't do this all at once. This has to be a long-term plan to address the myriad of needs that exist, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Could you or somebody else, sort of, express the importance or not of natural light to the emotional and mental well-being of the students of different ages, as well as the adults that were in school?
Yeah, I can't quote you the research off the top of my head, but I will certainly be able to provide that for a future meeting, that there is a connection between natural light and emotion. And I can certainly, I don't have the research able to quote off the top of my head. I'm aware that it exists and I can provide it.
Yes, my sense is that I know it exists, but I'm wondering sort of to what extent is the importance of that?
Sure.
And I'm sure it's been studied, so
Yeah.
I would appreciate some.
Yeah, absolutely. Then if you don't mind taking a note of that.
Yeah, on that, the state of Connecticut, when we apply for a project, we're going through the paperwork and design aspect. Natural light, there's actually a natural light letter, that the superintendent, needs to sign that says that we're maximizing the opportunities to introduce that. So the state of Connecticut does recognize the importance, of natural light, so just wanted to have that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Good point. I didn't know this.
I appreciate the explanation that you gave, and I know it was a general overview for all the schools, but I have to assume that when you're talking grammar schools versus middle schools versus high schools, there's a lot of different types of, rooms that you might need in high schools versus grammar schools, and I guess as we move forward with the project, whatever it is first, we have to narrow those things down. But, I get that, there's more group learning. Forgive me if I'm not an educator, but if there's more group learning in grammar schools and middle schools versus high schools, is that space different than high schools?
That's a great question. And as we evolve, our goal, and COVID has kind of pushed this even along a little bit, is to engage more high school students and more, opportunities to engage learning outside of the classroom. So in workspaces, in internships, in practicums, to really apply what they've been learning. And so, if anything, we would be looking, the demand at the high school space may come down a little bit if we can continue to move in that direction. In terms of collaborative learning, that's something that we strongly reinforce in our teaching staff K-12. So there's a lot of value in exchanging ideas with others and trying to evaluate, it's like metacognition. Why are you thinking? Like, what are you thinking about? Well, you're thinking about solving this problem. And so we encourage that with all of our kids all the way through. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess you answered part of it, because my thinking is space-wise, which I had brought up from the very beginning when COVID hit, could it change the way we have to design our schools?
Right.
And, I know that Chuck has said that we don't know yet,
Right.
but I think you're already seeing that we may be changing the way we have to design our schools, because I think it's, the one good thing I've got of COVID is maybe it's giving opportunities to teach a different way to some of these students that we didn't realize it. Yeah, I'm sorry, parents, but there might not be any more snow day, or kids, there might not be any more snow day.
Right.
But I mean, things like that. And I'm just wondering, are we gonna need more space for some of these schools, even if we have to rent them? In some of them, do we have to have more space?
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, to your point too, Marlene and I forget who said it, but, you know, don't let a crisis ruin an opportunity, something along that line. I know I'm mangling that, but we've been thinking a lot about what are the positives that we can take out of COVID, post-COVID. So like when we were doing how are we going to respond to COVID, that was one of the first things we did was say, you know, when this is over, we need, you know, better technology, audio in the rooms to connect with kids outside the building, but this will be great when our kids come back too. So we're trying to think about that and how will that help us. We're getting right to the point now, Don, I think, where we are past like triage crazy and starting to get over that hill and plan a little bit more for post this.
So libraries, like in more modern designs, are generally part of the school. They've changed dramatically in the last few decades. But like, what is your vision for what a library should be in a school building? Like room spaces, collabs, learning commons. I think that's going to be important when we think about the school as a whole.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It was funny, when I became a high school principal a long time ago, 9 years ago, at Treasure High, I say to Ben, who, you know, was still the chief operating officer at that time, the library should be the heart of the school. Ours is the armpit. It wasn't handicap accessible. It wasn't air conditioned. It smelled. It was just a bad place. And all the credit in the world to Ben and his team, and now Ann Wellsky, who totally transformed the place. Now, outside of the COVID experience, it's a place where kids gather before school. Sometimes it's social, sometimes it's, often it's academic. They're accessing different resources, whether it's a printer or something like that. There are book talks that are held through the day there. There are poetry slams. There are presentations that occur there. We have a couple of different breakout spaces that even our board used for negotiations in there. It's not a come be quiet and read a book place anymore. It's very much one of those collaborative spaces that I was referencing. Rich?
Last question, I won't keep bothering you, but has the board taken any stance at this point in terms of the sixth grade, or whether they have a preference for the sixth grades to be in the elementary schools or be part of the sixth grade?
Sure. Well, we initially had proposed a 6 through 8 middle school. And the reason that we did that in 2017, after the Perkins-Eastman study, was, you know, multifaceted. One part of it was, by designing a 6 through 8 school, a lot of the curriculum is designed now, 6 through 8. A lot of the resources are, when you talk to our staff, there is a preference for 6 through 8. Another part of that is that we believe that in our plan, which was not just one school, but a multi-year, multi-school plan, that by pulling 6th grade into 8, or 6th grade into the middle school, that we created flexibility at the lower grades, which allowed for taking some buildings offline. And providing swing space if needed for renovations, because it's cheaper to do that rather than trying to bring in trailers or whatever. But I wouldn't, and well, again, the board went back, reviewed it months later at a planning committee meeting, or maybe a year later at a planning committee meeting, and reaffirmed that they felt that that was the right way to go. Now, that was a different board, different composition of individuals. I could tell you today that the need to move forward is important, hinging on critical for us as a school system and a community. If we, are looking at the big picture, 6 through 8 is not like educationally critical. It's not really going to move the needle on our performance and something like that. Do we think it would be beneficial? Sure. but there are a lot of things that are beneficial. There are trade-offs all over the place, particularly on something this big. And so, you know, I don't know that the board can continue to talk about this, but I wouldn't say it was, you know, that or nothing by any stretch.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the entire board is there tonight, so they can weigh in.
So the reason we invited you all here is because of that exact reason. It's a great segue. Because in 2017, we did have an idea of what you guys wanted. There was a plan put in place for like you said, multi-year, multi-school. And the initial first step was that 6 to 8 middle school. But it was a different board at that time. So now the fact that we have a few more members on the board, we different members, we really invited you all here to get a sense of what your feelings are. If you have an opinion one way or the other, if you have direction, we would like to hear that. So I'm opening it up to all of you to be able to contribute in any way, so that we get some feedback and have it received.
Yes. I can just give a comment.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jeff, for the overview. Thank you for talking about the middle school approach. So I know the committee's been grasping which option to start with. And I know there's a subcommittee later that's going to talk about, or form a committee to look about options in general, what can be done. I want to look at it from which option to start with. The middle school, as Jeff said, 6 to 8 model, was less about moving the needle in education for having 6th graders, 3 years old in school. It was more about trying to accommodate whether you replace every other school besides a middle school, or you renovate every other school to formation. You cannot imagine, for example, if you're going to fully renovate North. How are you going to do that with kids in school? Construction works at the same time. You pray this well, but not dangerous, lack of space, etc. The more we went through these options, we said, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was a new school built? Start with middle school, use Dodd as a swing school. So if you're going to renovate every other building or building in place or build elsewhere, at least you have a place to put that school while major construction is going on. So that was one reason. So I wouldn't get too concerned about the educational needs for the middle school. The educational spec for it, Jeff touched upon a lot of this, which was science labs, green spaces. That could be done at every school if space exists. Or if there was, if there was more room in the back parking lot in Highland, why couldn't we put a technology center that serves to that space, science lab, language labs, expand that way? So I think the educational spec that the last board put together for middle school has a lot of the components that Jeff talked about that could be replicated at each of the other schools if you didn't build those. So I think as you move forward, as we move forward, the group with Collier's help, we're going to, I think, find out what can we do with existing schools. If he did nothing, there's the zero-based approach, or do nothing approach, where if you didn't build anything, you still got to do something for the schools. And the feedback that Collier's has and the group has, just in the current conditions, how we generate a project list of just what to do, if nothing else moving forward, build on top of that. Can we add here at Highland world language labs? Where would we put it? Can we do something with parking? So all options are on the table as far as I'm concerned. And one thing that maybe the group's unaware of, the CNC and machining and design curriculum at Church High School has been expanding quite a bit the last few years. In fact, the Monday's meeting curriculum improved some new courses for that program. One in which allows students that take the CNC design course to actually get prepared for industry certification. So we're seeing kids, students that want to get into the trades, taking advantage of CNC CAP program. We actually got a CNC machine through a grant late last year. So there's a lot of opportunity around that. I'm not saying we got to build a Roblox test school, but for me at the high school, perhaps in the middle school, maybe there's some space there to build, to introduce some of these concepts. And at least when they go into high school, they have the ability to say, hey, I took an early CAD intro course in middle school. I really want to do this. I want to go to Roblox tech. Or at the high school, if they got deep additional course offerings and equipment, they might graduate and go to a trade school or right into the apprenticeship. So I just assume that's been that, you know, selfishly, I see a culinary program in our schools, but not because I'm a chef, but there's always a huge interest in that. Jeff, pretty much for me, was, you know, we've talked this for so many years now. I mean, these are the things that we're looking to do. The board can absolutely help the committee narrow down, you know, which buildings, which spaces should we focus on. So I see all options on the table. We're not going to add anything else other than thank you for having us here tonight. I know the new board members and our veterans are anxious to get some feedback too. So
Great.
that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder, and I apologize, I really don't want to call Tony out on anything, but we are required to keep our masks on while we're speaking too,
Yeah.
so thank you.
Sorry to talk.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me.
Go ahead.
So I actually remember the educational benefits of a 6th through 8th middle school being sort of a bigger priority than how Tony kind of expressed it just now. But I would add, I just really wanted to add one thing, and it is this. We did not go into that project with any preconceived ideas. Building a new middle school was not our objective. We waited to see what that project as a whole came out to. And we had scenarios. We had 3 or 4 different scenarios of ways we could approach, and we chose one based on a lot of conversation. We did engage the community as well. And I just want to make that clear, that we didn't go into that with a preconceived idea. And I don't come into this project with a preconceived idea of what has to be done. But we didn't before either.
I agree with you completely. I don't think any of us have that idea in our head of what we have to do, which is why we have all these people here doing that analysis. So I'm hopeful that everybody is keeping an open mind on all the different options, and we are here just to get educational objectives so that we can understand where we need to move. If there's a huge hole somewhere, let's attack that first. But we really want to just hear that from you guys. So thank you very much. Go ahead, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you. Did everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
For me, I thought Jeff's presentation was right on the mark as far as our needs for the educational system. I think that this group should really focus on a comprehensive plan. I think what we'll find, I don't know if you have gotten a number from the town yet as far as what we spent, but my guess is that we won't have unlimited resources, and that it seemed to me, I'm going on the tours that I went on almost all, I don't think I went to the high school, that every building needs something, and that we should attempt to upgrade every building as much as possible and not focus on just one thing. I think with a little bit of hindsight, that the 6th grade middle school isn't perhaps as necessary as we thought it was, except for identifying swing space so that other schools can be safely renovated. So that's definitely going to be a challenge. But overall, I think that we need to have a comprehensive plan so that we can plan accordingly. And also, as representative from Darcy, that I just did a recent tour there and saw all the special programs that they do for special education and pre-K, and that should also be a priority. That this plan really prioritize where all of those programs would go if Darcy School is closed, and that we need to generate that space somewhere else. Because there was a lot of special things about that building. You always heard how terrible it is. And I've walked through it about 4 or 5 times now. Even this last time, I didn't even realize that there was an elevator in it. And I discovered now, I was like, oh wow, so we have a lot of ADA compliance already built into the building, except for maybe it was built in the front doors. I don't remember that. But there's a lot of special things about that building. I don't know if the building itself could could be renovated in some way, but at least the programs inside, as well as, figuring out where the Doolittle kindergarten would go. Those things definitely need to be considered, when, putting together a new plan.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, go ahead.
So I'll just keep it quick because I'm going to be at all the meetings, whereas I'll be able to give my input as a member of the board. But just a couple takeaways from Jeff's presentation, kind of recurring themes there was safe schools, bright, adaptable, modern, good airflow, and community buildings that could double as large community breakout spaces. Totally agree with that. I don't know what the best plan is, but when I heard the original presentation for the 6th through 8th middle school at the time, I had a 5th grader here at Highland School. And if I was to vote on that, I would have voted against that because, again, I don't know what all the facts are, the pros and cons of having 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in the same building. But as I followed my daughter through her elementary school career to 6th grade, I really liked her being kept young, so to speak, in that 6th grade setting, and also being able to collaborate with the younger grades in school. She was a bus monitor, she would go to the different classrooms, she would help with the younger kids, and so she started to learn some more responsibility and become more of a teenager, so to speak, in that 6th grade year. So I always thought that was kind of a cool thing to do. So if I was to vote now, I'd vote for 7th and 8th middle school. But that's just
Hi, go ahead.
Hi. So I, was on the board when we came up with the last plan, and I think obviously, the goal has to be as Adam pointed out, and we're not telling you anything you don't already know. We need a vision for the town that covers, all of the schools over a long period of time. I mean, it's just not, can't pick and choose necessarily to do work on one or two schools and then be done with it. So ideally, there is a way to get from here to, whatever, 20 years from now, where all of the schools have been touched and, renovated or whatever in a way that creates these, that addresses the needs that we think that our students have. So, on the middle school, as Ian said, we didn't go into that process thinking, okay, we need to have 6th to 8th middle school. But over the course of developing the plan, it became obvious, I think, to all of us that were on the board at that time, that the 6th to 8th middle school, there was an educational purpose that would be, addressed, that 6th graders really do benefit from, being with a curriculum that's a little bit older than what they can do in the elementary schools. And on top of that, as Jeff mentioned earlier, since we could, if we did the 6th to 8th middle school, move kids into their home schools, the Doolittle kids, for example, the kindergartens and free up space, I mean, it just addressed a lot of different issues and seemed like, the right first step. I remain convinced, but I'm not telling you what to do. But I still think that was the right first step, and then bringing online other renovations that you go, what order they're in. I think it may even be hard to figure that out today, but there are a lot of possibilities, and the problem that I think I think we can get bogged down in, oh my God, there's like all these different options, and so how do we get to the 4, 5, 6 options that make the most sense? So I commend all of you guys for taking this on, but if it were, up to me, I think that the 6th to 8th middle school concept is very much worth keeping on the table. Let me just put it that way. And again, it addresses a couple of pretty important aspects of what we're trying to accomplish, I think, as a town.
Renee, you have a question or comment?
It's more of a comment and a request, and I would like to thank Jeff for putting together this presentation. Great, and I love these 4 points. They really summarize a lot of what we've been discussing lately. take these 4 points as a blueprint, we need to start quantifying what each of them mean. What each of them mean in terms of what the school requirements are. For example, the first one, ADA and HVAC, that is pretty easy to assess whether the building can accommodate HVAC or not. That's, you know, that's an exact science. The second one, we say space and resources for programs. So whether we need a new pottery lab, or whether we need a new computer lab. My question there is, what are the spaces that are required? Are the students missing out opportunities for having knowledge on virtual reality because there's not a virtual reality lab in town? Like if there was a list or at least some guidelines as to what those resource needs are, I think it would be important to identify those and I'm putting myself in place of the taxpayer, the people of the town. They want to understand what is it really that the kids are missing out on. We go to the third one, collaborative experiences. I 100% get that one, and I think that one translates to classroom space. Right now, a lot of the schools have 500 square foot classrooms. They need 700 to 800 square feet. So that is just physical space. That one is just number one, quantified. The fourth one is another one that I think needs more definition. What does the community need or want as far as common spaces or community spaces, right? Is there anything from either town council or any other town entity that could guide us as to how many people do we need to house, or what kind of activities are going to be performed? So, out of these 4 points, I think 2 and 4, we still need to do a little bit more homework as to what it is exactly that we need, and I think that will help us at least cross out what schools are better candidates than others, and rank in some way that is quantifiable.
Jen, if I could respond to Renee real quick. Thank you, Renee. Good points, and you know, as it relates to that question on bullet 2, we can definitely work on that and provide some more background. Because I think a lot of this is I close, about gap analysis in some ways. You know, who's the furthest away from where we need to be? What does that mean, right? And then number 4, being the entity in town that services all the community needs. You know, we have a pretty good sense of demand and use, and we can definitely, you know, this is stuff that should be fairly easy for us to turn around for.
Great, thank you very much. We still have 2 more Board of Ed members that haven't spoken up yet. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, my general, I want to have great outcomes for students. I want that back to form, and with every benefit there's a cost. My general perspective on it is, I think, going through the Board of Ed, the council, and the voters and referendum and the secret ballot, I don't think we're getting a lot of new schools, a lot of new construction. I think the renovation could work. I think we can have a lot of good outcomes with that, and that's where I suggest going. Like Tony, I think Tony was kind of touching on it, but if we need some new space in the school, could we add a new room, new structure, rather than knock down and build inside the school? I just think that would be, that's my own personal preference, but I also think we probably have a higher likelihood of success at referendum with renovations rather than new construction.
Okay. Thank you. Kate, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what my colleagues have said. With regard to 6 through 8, personally, in the school where I taught in California, we did have 6 through 8 together, and ended up having to separate the 6th graders from the 7th and 8th graders, simply because there was that, they were young, they were still, they are almost 2 different animals, to so to speak. I mean, nevertheless, I think, so I kind of side with Andrew on that one, but I could be persuaded. I just like the idea of keeping kids as long as we can. I am concerned about the traffic, and just everything else. These schools have, particularly Dodd and the high schools have kind of, grown up in hard to access areas, and how to solve that, I don't know, short of finding a large to build a campus that pulls it out of the center of town and begins to develop the center. But that's going to take probably more money than we could ever look for in coordination with the town council and the town planning and zoning. That I don't think we have the time for because these buildings are old. And I just would say I remember being only tangentially aware at the time of the old school, the modernization plan a few years ago, and seeing the price tag and just being blown away. The plan hadn't been sold to the town, and so I'm glad you guys are talking about how to sell the idea of the town. I think to identify what education in the next 10 to 15 years is going to look like to someone my age, who went to school before school was invited or invented. You gotta make those who do not have children in the school and who have not had children in the school for a long time aware of how things are changing. And also explain to them it is a phased approach. We're not going to do 450 million all at once. So I think you want to get better outcomes that way.
So, Rich, can we make sure that we did attack that, or at least discuss that issue about communication, and making sure we cover those issues in the communication plan?
That's part of the plan.
Awesome, thank you. Anything else?
I think everyone else is saying.
I would add that, Faith brings up that point about, and I've heard this many times from many public meetings, that they saw the sticker shock on the full plan. Retrospectively, obviously, a mistake. And what I appreciated about this is that, it's phased out. There's a plan for the first phase and the cost. The next phase doesn't have to immediately begin. I mean, you're committing to a little phase at a time. And it gives time, to breathe in between and reassess. What if the population doubles? Now you gotta reassess. Probably not likely, but, hypothetically. Or what if the financial circumstances change, for better or worse? It gives these little intermissions where you can jump in and reshape the plan.
Anyone else have any other comments? Don, yes?
Yeah, I just had one, because I know we had discussed the Board of Ed and the Auburn High School being part of this plan as well, which it should be. But because of the lack of ADA compliance over at Humiston, I'm almost thinking that might have to be almost a top priority phase, because if the state comes in and says, hey guys, you guys are so, you can't use this building. If we have a 10-year plan like this, I think they will give us some space here, but I think it's an important thing to make sure that, I know we're talking about all the schools that are priorities. I think that's one of the top priorities as well, because that building is probably in the worst shape of all of our buildings, I would assume. I think that's something that we really, when we're deciding on what priorities are, we can't let that fall behind because, we need a new middle school first, or we need a high school. And that's something that should be more towards the top as well.
Not to let it go, Chapman also has
Yes.
severe ADA issues.
Mhm.
Yes, Sylvia?
Yeah, just put all these pieces together. I've been sitting here quietly listening, and many of the things we've talked about over and over again. And I think it's really important way the board is prioritizing their educational needs and the space needs, it will be important for the town council to be able to evaluate cost and to make sure that over the course of whatever period of time, 10 years, 5 years, 8, that we can manage the bonding and so on and so forth. And that's a complicated process that here at this time, right now, we haven't even addressed. So I think we're on the right track with Colliers. They are the experts. They've been through this with many communities. They've heard our conversations, which have been very important. Rich's committee going to the schools to identify what the teachers feel. Jeff's presentation tonight is great. We've heard people's opinions about what they think, but until we get something from Colliers that gives us a plan to work on, the conversation, we can still keep talking and talking and talking, and we're not going to get anywhere. So we need to have all those pieces, and I commend you for including, you should have done this probably 6 months ago, but for including the Board of Ed and the town council, so you can see the perspective. The last plan, the problem with it was, as from my perspective on the council, is we were not involved in this early part of it. We came in toward the end, but we were included in it. But by then, the plan was to do the total plan. And I absolutely 100% think you will be much more successful, as Jeff says, if you divide it into smaller projects, because you're not overwhelming everybody with a large number at the beginning. When they see the success of the first one, it's a domino effect. And other school systems I've seen it done. They finish one school, they come into it and they say, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. We need to do the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and that will help the project go along. So I think following the council's input about the finances and how we will go about trying to figure out how to pay for all of this, then we have to rely on Colliers to be able to give us a plan. They've heard all this over and over. They kind of know where we are. They've had experience with other school systems and know what works and what doesn't work, or has had problems or not. So it would be helpful to be coming back to us very shortly with a basic beginning outline of what they think would work. And then we need to get into the weeds about whether we're 6th and 8th grade, whether we're, all of those things. So,
Yes, and we will be inviting the town council.
right,
It's
and
actually
I
part of
knew
the
that was
agenda.
on your agenda. That's important. That's
We'll
important.
talk about it then.
Yep.
Tony?
Next, so that's actually, I mentioned that, I feel like we're having that discussion again.
Say that again, honey.
Thank you for saying that, but I believe like we're having that same discussion again, right? Move forward, but that's a good point. I think, a lot of us asked tonight, when we're being doing the board superintendent, which buildings, which programs, I think we'll get there. I think that'll help. But Don, I disagree that Huntston's a priority. It's not for me. It's not that bad of a shape, really standing. It's not going to collapse. But you're right, it will become a priority if the OCR, Office of Rights, comes in and does an assessment. Then again, any one of our buildings is open for that. And when I run this committee, if you're not aware, in 2009, we had an assessment done by OCR Cheshire High School. A very, very thorough assessment. And that generated, it was about what, $4 million roughly of fixes to do. And we're still doing it, over the course of 10 years. Again, that can happen in Highland, that can happen in Chapman, and maybe not to that extent. So it becomes a priority if and when the state intervenes. But from a safety perspective, I don't think it's a priority. I do think the kids, the staff, and the board of office will be better something else. But I agree, it's part of a comprehensive plan. We'd love to see where that fits. And we'll get there. So, that being said, we can be assessed at any time.
Can I just add to that also? I think the only reason that Chapman and Humiston are put on the back burner, even with their high ADA compliance needs, is because they really service so few students, much fewer students than our other buildings. So that has to be weighed into the factor too.
I will say one thing, having a wife who has a disability and having had children at Chapman and not having her being able to go up to the second floor to meet teachers, it's not just for students. And, for parent-teacher conferences and things like that, you can't just think about the students. You have to think about parents who have to go to parent-teachers. And my wife was not able to go up for the seminar. I feel ADA compliance is important in my life, but I'm sure, you know, if you don't have it in your life, then I understand, but, you know, I always think that that's important too. So.
Okay, well, I think we have everyone's point of view. I think it's time to move on. Item number B on here is just a reminder about the roles and responsibilities of the board members that are on this committee. I know when you go to board meetings, one of you will report back what's going on the SMC and report to the rest of the Board of Ed so that the entire Board of Ed has information about what we're doing. I want to see the opposite kind of happening a little bit more. So I would like to add an agenda item going forward where you then report back to us if there's anything that comes from a Board of Ed meeting that we need to know about. So I'm not sure if you want to decide to rotate or have a chairperson or whatever. I don't think it needs to be formal, but if someone could just say, we had a meeting, we talked about this, want you to know that, that would be really helpful for us so that we can get information from you guys as well.
That's a great idea, Jen. I think easily the kind of meetings that we have information that we share, that's Andrew. So yeah, we'll work on it.
Okay.
Be happy to.
What about the town side?
Town side, we're going to talk about at the next meeting. So this meeting is really about getting Board of Ed involved and getting information back and forth. And the last item on the agenda is to talk about the town council side of things. Thanks. We're on it.
Yeah,
Okay. So that brings us to item number 5. And now I'm going to let Chuck talk.
Yes.
Thank you.
So Rebecca from my Lower Room, they wrapped up their enrollment projection study, breaking it down by the district. Everybody on the committee should have a presentation. We also have some key slide takeaways from it, so we'll have her walk through that and maybe kind of help us with some of the takeaways.
Okay, great. Can everybody hear me? So I'm just gonna briefly recap the projections because I gave you a pretty lengthy presentation the last time I was with you. And just to update you, because we did input the 2020-21 enrollment figures, and that helped us finalize our elementary projections. And then I'm gonna get into the school capacity and projected utilization analysis. So again, we've updated the trend numbers with 2021 numbers. We expected a little bit more of a change as a result of COVID, but you actually held fairly steady for your 2021 numbers. So despite the pandemic, there's a lot of similar trends. And as you can see, you know, you have been declining, but your elementary really sort of plateaued over the last few years. So over those last few years, the decline has been primarily at the middle and high school levels. When we look at the elementary schools as individuals, again, we have seen a decline, but a relative stabilization over the last few years. The individual schools may be hard to see in the back. At the top, you have Highland as your largest elementary. The purple is Doolittle. Chapman is shown in a gold, and then Darcy in gray at the bottom. I just want to make a note that there are some special ed and district-wide programs that are not included in some of these numbers. So at Highland, you have an autism program. The Bridges program at Doolittle are not included, just so that you're comparing apples and apples from year to year over time. I'll just show you briefly the persistency ratio table again, and I explained this last time. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I really just want to make the point that when we were looking at an estimate of in-migration to the system, which was really just looking at a larger subset of your student enrollment as it progresses from one year to the next, were you losing students or were you gaining students? That's really what this is measuring. And we're measuring it at the first through seventh grade and then second through eighth grade levels, when families tend to be more stable in their housing, wanting their students to stay in the schools that they're attending. What you can see is, even in this year, your trend was on target with what you were at last year. There was a little drop off from previous years, but you still were bringing in students. I also just want to highlight for you that that birth to K ratio, which again is looking at a birth cohort within the community and the number of kindergartners 5 years later that entered your school system. you actually had the highest ratio you've had in this time period this year. 2015 was a down year in births, which you returned a higher, or you enrolled a higher number of kindergartens than you would have expected based on your previous birth to K ratios this year. So you were still experiencing in-migration, even in this pandemic year.
What's that ratio mean? What's the numerator and denominator? What is
Sure, it's this. It is comparing, what this chart is showing you, is these are births within Cheshire in the blue line. And then this is the kindergarten cohort that entered, this is 5 years later. So it's a couple of enrollment. And what you can see and what I pointed out last time I was here is that you really flip the trend and you introduce full day kindergarten to the community, and that would be expected. Where you just really grew the space between that birth cohort and that kindergarten cohort. We're bringing more families into the community, and not necessarily just through births or you gaining students as kindergartners. And again, this year that gap between the two grew even more. So over the last 5 years, we were averaging about a 1.46. So in other words, 146 kindergartners enrolling compared to 100 births 5 years ago.
The gulf between in that previous slide, blue and the red, you could assume are people moving into the community.
Correct. There's never a 1-to-1 ratio between births,
Sure.
kindergarten enrollment. It's a 5-year time span. We're talking about people making life choices, but it's an indicator that you bring families into the community who are ready to enroll students. They're not necessarily coming here and then having children and then enrolling their students. You're bringing families into the community.
Do we know why that happened? Was it full day kindergarten?
Absolutely, the flip in the trend here is a result of full day kindergarten. So previously, you were likely having more families opting into private kindergarten or parochial school kindergarten programs or the like. And then you also increase the attractiveness of the community for bringing families in with that full day K. That's a selling point, especially in that time period, for school systems and communities.
But I don't know if you work with South Windsor or not, but they built and revamped their elementary schools as we talked about. It's a visual, like the red and blue are probably even further apart
Yes.
in terms of demand in the community. And some may see that as well, that's not good they're demanding more in schools, but there's also higher housing demand in the community, driving up housing prices.
Definitely. So we did revise the projections. We still felt that there was some influence of COVID on this year's numbers that we're not completely comfortable with. So what we did, rather than incorporating that into our assumptions on the persistency ratios we were using moving forward, we just used your 2021 enrollment numbers as the starting point rather than the 1920 numbers that we had used as the starting point. So it did bring the projections down a little bit, but we're still showing you a low, medium, and high set of projections for K through 12. And you can see we're showing relative stability over the next 4 to 5 years with all 3 models. And then it's a degree of rebound between the low, the medium, and the high. Our low numbers are shown in the green, and that gray dashed line are the NASDAQ projections. So we are in line with their model on our low model. We are suggesting that you use the high model in your planning phase because it's much easier to refine that number as you move forward with actual design work. It's much harder to add space to design considerations as you get more deep into design work. So these are the updated numbers. Again, district-wide change. The low at the top, the medium in the middle, the high is what we're suggesting you use. This is just showing you change in the first 5 years of the projection horizon, and then in the latter half, the change from now to 2930. And you can see the high school is projected to decline over the first 5 years, about 24%, over the span of the projection horizon, about 15%. The middle school decline of about 5% over the first 5 years, but a rebound to gain 17% overall. The elementary level, K through 6, though, is projected to increase over the first 5 years by 13%, and then by 24% out to 10 years. So the elementary level is really expected to see an increase relatively soon. And you have been plateaued for a while, it's now going to make its rebound. And a lot of that is predicated on the fact that you had 3 very high growth years, relatively speaking, in 2016, 17, and 18. And those are cohorts that are just starting their school.
Rebecca, just if you go back one slide, so if you were to project out 5 more years, you would expect the high school
Yes,
enrollment to
correct.
continue to go up, right? So I just want to make sure that
Yes,
we're all on the same page with that.
right. So you're still feeling the effects of smaller cohorts matriculating up through the system. And that is why for the 7th through 8th grade, we start to see that change in the latter half of the projection horizon where they're rebounding. And you would expect to see that end up in the high school system.
Wouldn't you only expect it to come back to where it is though? If it's 24% and you got negative 24 in 5 years?
You know, we haven't played the numbers out to see how much it would return, but yes, I would hazard to guess, if you look back at how much it has declined, where you were at the 15, 60 level about 10 years ago, and you're gonna get down, yes, you'd probably be returning to levels that you saw in the last decade. So again, this is just showing the district-wide high projections. K through 6 shown in the orange, 7 and 8 shown in the green, and the gold is the high school projections. This is new. We had finalized our elementary projections last time we were here. So what we've done is taken that district projection for the K through 6 system and we've distributed it across the schools as we've seen the trends in the schools affecting their individual enrollment. So again, you saw a significant uptick in births from 2016 through 18, and that is going to lead to a projected significant increase next year, where of about 100 students from 2058 this year to 2185, and then it just is sustained because you have 3 cohorts that are just going to enter one right after the other. What you see play out is a delayed impact in the increase at Doolittle. That's just because the kindergarten is not physically in the building. And so there's a significant increase at Darcy, and then you see the increase hit Doolittle when the kindergarten actually enters as first graders to the building. All districts are projected to grow. However, Chapman and Highland really are projected to experience strong growth trends. So now I'm going to move into the school capacity discussion. The way we went about looking at the capacity of the individual buildings, we started with that propensity study. We reviewed it. We then met with your building administrators to talk about the current programming that's in the buildings and how they're using their classroom spaces. Based on how the buildings are being used now, the programming that's deployed within them, we developed capacities that are pretty much in line with the Perkins-Eastman study, what they call the practical school capacities. We call the functional capacity of the building, and it really reflects your current programming, which is important to you keep in the back of your mind, because your current programming may not reflect your educational objectives. So, for example, the fact that Doolittle doesn't have its kindergarten within its walls, that may not reflect where you want. So these capacities you need to have that in the back of your mind when you're looking at these capacities. We also, through those discussions, noted a lot of the things that the superintendent mentioned already tonight about the increasing needs of special ed programming spaces that are appropriate for those students. A lot of concerns that are beyond the classroom capacity of the building, concerns with the core space capacities such as cafeterias, gymnasiums, and also a lot about site constraints such as circulation, parking, pickup, drop-off, So there are issues beyond the classroom capacities that we just want to make sure are kept in mind. But here are the numbers that we developed for functional capacities in the elementary schools. And they're largely based on the grade level classrooms that are being used now, as well as some other full-size rooms that contribute to the overall enrollment of the building. So for example, special ed programming at Doolittle and Highland contributes enrollment at a much lower level than regular, but still contributes enrollment to the building. And so we used an assumption of 20 to 21 for an average class size for regular education classrooms, and then an 8 to 15 range on the special ed programming and pre-K classes to develop these functional capacity numbers by building. And so you can see overall in the district, you have a functional capacity of about 2,500 seats for pre-K to 6. But again, we just want to make note that Darcy, where you have a mix of full and half-day pre-K, intensive program, kindergarten for Doolittle, you also have significant birth to 3 programming in the building. It's really this capacity number is really a function of how that building is being used right now. If you were to program it differently, we might come up with a different capacity there. For Doolittle, there's special ed and district-wide programming that is contributing towards that capacity. And again, without kindergarten in the building, it may not be reflecting your educational objectives. For Highland, again, as I mentioned, there is special education programming that is affecting capacity and enrollment. So when we think about a functional capacity, this is kind of the capacity that, if you go beyond it, you're uncomfortable, you're going to have to be looking at your class sizes. So at an elementary level, we typically think about a 90% of capacity as a good operating level, because that gives you the room and flexibility you need to accommodate an unusually large cohort where, you might have a second grade class that just typically you have 2 grade levels per in your building, 2 sections per grade level in your building, and for whatever reason you get a small bubble in a grade, and that affects that you need 3 sections for the next 5 years or 6 years in the building. So a 90% is a good sort of operating number to use at an elementary level. So we took those capacity numbers and that 90% operating level shown as the blue bars here, and we just aligned our projected enrollment against those numbers. And you can see that currently your elementary system is operating within your capacity and your target enrollments. But you are shifting some programs around due to limitations within individual buildings. However, it's quickly projected to reach your target enrollment levels within 2 years, and then exceed your actual functional capacity by 26, 27. When we take a look at this at the individual school building level, Darcy, although this year is functioning below its target enrollment and functional capacity levels, with the jump up in kindergarten cohort expected next year, and the fact that they house the Doolittle kindergarten program, we do project them to be above their functional capacity and certainly above their target enrollment levels, really over the next 9 to 10 years. Again, we may program that building differently to help facilitate and accommodate that level of enrollment. For Chapman, it's projected to exceed its target within 3 years and exceed its functional capacity in 6 years. For Doolittle, there is more space, but again, kindergarten is not in the building. And so you do have more room. You are below your target enrollment levels, and again, this is assuming that kindergarten remains at Darcy. For Highland, you're projected to exceed your target levels next year and exceed your functional capacity within 3 years. At Norton, you're projected to be roughly at your targeted enrollment levels, but then you start to exceed in 26, 27, and at the end of the projection horizon, you're expected to start to butt up against your functional capacities. For the middle and high schools, what we did here is we took a look at the grade level classrooms. And we talked to administrators about usage of the facilities, and we came up with functional capacities, very similar to what the study had come up with. We were assuming average class sizes of 20 at the middle school, 17 at the high school, just due to the fact that it's really a scheduling issue at the high school. There's many more electives and students opting into their courses. So we're using lower than what you might find as average class sizes, just to accommodate scheduling issues. So when we apply the capacity numbers of 900, about 900 at Dodd, about 1,600, 1,700 at Cheshire High School, compared to your projected enrollment, both schools remain well within that functional capacity over that 10-year span. But as you can see at Dodd, the enrollment is projected to start to increase as a result of that elementary increase moving up through the system towards the end of the projection horizon. So that is something to be aware of. But still, it is projected to be well within that functional capacity of about 900 students. So with that, happy to take any questions on this.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed it. It's a little difficult to hear through the mask. So, I mean, so I guess that's, I'm wondering about the enrollment, the travel enrollment. There's, if you could just speak to that for a minute, what are the main factors there?
So, like the enrollment,
Well, I see enrollment increase. Okay. I mean, there's, I'm thinking there's housing turnover, there was baby bubble that you mentioned, 16 to 18.
yes. So I apologize. I did make a pretty big presentation 2 meetings ago, I believe, that looked at a variety of factors, including the housing market, the economic activity of the community, demographic trends within the community. We looked at spatially different trends in different neighborhoods. I believe is that presentation available on?
It's not in the
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's another more detailed presentation that goes into the factors behind that decrease. And a lot of it is housing turnover in the community, that birth bubble that is coming, as well as the, just the in-migration that we've been experiencing over the last 5 years.
Well, so the immigration is people with kids not in the school system yet? Because I'm just trying, so this is what goes through my head. The national number is like 2.1 kids per family. And so what happens with COVID is there's a speed up of the transition. Seniors move out earlier because all of a sudden their housing, their house price is up 10%. Let's take it and move to South Carolina. So I see some of that, so there's a transition. But that would sort of be blended in over the, 17 years is the average, I think, for housing, keeping a house here in Cheshire. The new housing starts with what is going through my mind, actually increasing population. But there are other factors in that, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so we did look for what, we talked to planning and zoning about new housing development. We didn't see a significant impact coming from new development. It's more of that churn in your existing housing stock, which has been strong for the last 2 years. By all indications, we expect it to remain very strong over the next year. And then we are projecting low, medium, and high ranges based on how much does it start to slack off or stay the same. And so there's a better explanation of the difference between the low, medium, and high model and the assumptions we're making.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it. Yeah, in fact, can I get that? I don't know if that's,
Yes.
you have it?
Yep, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I just emailed it to the board members.
You did? All
Yes,
done?
just now, sorry.
Awesome, thank you.
I want to wait till you already saw it first.
Done, I love it.
Go ahead.
How immutable are these numbers? Connecticut, is not looking at a very good economic picture. We've already got companies that are saying they're gonna be pulling out. How do you factor what are known, economic hotspot, or economic, pitfalls into these numbers? Because we do have a number of companies
again, that gets back to why we prefer that low, medium, and high. That goes back to why we are preparing a low, medium, and high projection, where we are making some different assumptions on economic activity, especially in the housing market. And so that low projection model is assuming a drop off in housing sales and in migration to the community. The medium is pretty much keeping your current trends the same. The high is projecting more based on sort of COVID trends of a really hot housing market continuing for a few years. And so we can't predict, you know, if we crack with about 400 people, how many households may turn over in Cheshire because of that. But what we can say is Cheshire is an attractive community to families. And so when there is any kind of housing turnover that is precipitated by an economic change, it is likely going to attract families. And so you may actually experience an opposite effect than what you're thinking on some you know, acute changes in the economic market.
Just to follow up, how does this group pinpoint which number, which projection?
So that's why we suggest at this phase, use that high planning number, because it is much easier as you get into a more discrete design process to take away space from what we think you need than it is to add space to what you need. If that makes sense. Thanks.
Actually, I have a question kind of for Chuck Morton. So with the high, medium, low, if we use the high for enrollment projections as part of the state construction grant process, that's what we want to do. There's no issue with using the high enrollment projection, right?
No, and it's kind of Rebecca alluded to just now that, you know, we're looking at 10 years and you know, we're talking about, you know, the example of the South Windsor program, both us and Mullen have been involved with intimately. It's an ever-evolving process. We're here in 2020, we developed this plan. A couple years down the road, we're going to be constantly updating these numbers and evaluating these. And it's going to move. It's going to be an evolving process. So for planning purposes, when we're talking about the scenarios, we're going to be using these numbers because what they're going to indicate to us is what we call space standard, and that's what the state uses for the reimbursement ratio, but also gives us an indicator of what size should these buildings be in a relative close area. So usually a little bit bigger than the space standard, but that gives us an indication of, is your building big enough or not? And that's where we kind of start at a high level. So these are going to be evolving over time, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. But the state does, they do allow for it. We have to submit, you know, whenever that first project or projects may be, the current projection updated enrollments from districts to them in the grant applications. Okay.
Anybody else? Questions? Almost. All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Very good. Moving on to the next agenda item.
Can you keep that up for a second?
Sure. It's a status report from Colliers. Got Chuck and John. Chuck, you can speak into
Sure.
kind of where we're at, give us an update on the schedule, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on that in a minute if I could. I just want to maybe highlight a couple things here. I just want to introduce John Phillips first. I don't know if you've seen John maybe in virtual media, but I want to introduce John. John's part of our team working on this. On a couple of the, just to touch on that South Windsor planning, and I've been involved in that personally since 2014, so very, very intimate with it. I actually texted a picture of that to Dr. Carter, who was the superintendent. She said she'd be more happy to come here and speak with the group anytime if that's a desire. She'd like sharing her experiences in the group over the last 6 years and some of the trends that she's seen. So she offered that out.
Evan and I have
Yeah.
a couple of different occasions, actually. We took a tour of Sylvia Rich schools.
But a great program. It's evolved over the years. That's the second edition. There's actually a third edition that's out with updated enrollments. And Rebecca and the Malone team have been on board for that. But one thing, if we go back to the graph with the 5, this one right here, as we develop the options for us, it's a team effort. It's not just fire. We work collaboratively with them in our respective areas. Ours being one of the grant applications, space standards, looking at using their data to help drive it. And then ultimately, when we start talking about costs of options, that's where our probably we're more heavy in that area, and we develop those. So I just want to kind of stress that it's definitely a collaborative effort. But we're going to be looking at a holistic view as we develop these options and present them out, and we're going to talk about it with the committee in a little bit. You know, it's going to be data driven to start with. You know, I don't live in the community, so I don't know all the politics involved and preferences and so forth as much as you folks do. So we're going to be using really a more data driven process, and I wanted to show this graph because I think this graphically says a lot. I mean, this is, you know, honestly, some of the reasons we recommend them so many times because their graphics are very telling. They tell a story, and they kind of dictate. You kind of see pretty soon you're going to be needing more space in your elementary schools. It's graphically shown. You're going to run out of room in many of the areas. So that's going to be a big factor as we look at it. And then when you look at the middle school and the high school, those not so much. However, we all know the high school is in need of, you know, from facilities perspective, is in need of attention and needs some upgrades. So that's going to be a factor too. So all these factors are going to go into the different options. And ultimately, which option is preferred, obviously it's up to you. We're just going to be presenting facts and pros and cons, and we're going to develop a list of factors that we want your input on and what's important. And obviously, you know, cost, taxpayer impact, those are, you know, programmatic, how it affects the programmatic need. But then we're going to talk about like bus, if we start talking redistricting bus routes and timing, those are some factors that come in too. So there's going to be a lot of factors that develop that we're probably not even thinking of right now. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that as we go into these next steps. Very data driven. We don't have any pre-notions of what it should be. We're just going to look at it and see what it tells us as we move forward for that. If we could maybe bring up the schedule there. So in the last meeting in our macro, it's a handout here, and we talked about the overall macro schedule. And at the last meeting, we talked about from today's meeting to about the middle of January 20th, not 21st, it's 20th.
Right.
To hopefully, for the town to have a decision on a preferred option to bring to town council and to hopefully move it forward to the next steps. So what I said, we're going to develop, this is what we call a milestone schedule. Just taking that overall macro schedule, really assigning some specific dates between now and January, because that's not a lot of time. We're going to be in January before we know it. It's going to fly by. So these type of schedules we use in a normal project. We're going through design and a lot more activities. But we just kind of want to lay out the meetings over the next couple of months because it's going to be a bit of a heavy lift, frankly. There's going to be a lot of information for your committee to review and make decisions on and help and kind of guide us and give us feedback as well in how you want us to proceed. So in the blue in the left-hand column, it's really the middle, pre-referendum phase 2. That's where we're at right now with Malone completing their efforts. We completed our efforts a while ago. We want to take off trying to analyze the schools, the square footages, the room sizes. I think we shared some of that. Tonight, obviously, presenting the information from Malone, but in a couple weeks on November 2nd, we're going to have to move quickly over through these weeks, and we're going to start developing options based upon this information from Malone, but also our walkthroughs, the enrollments, and coming up with, for the next meeting, just in a narrative form of some options that we think we need to look at, or that the committee needs to look at, and get some of your feedback to make sure we're not going down a path that it may be a no-go. And that's
they say, no, we're not gonna go down that path for a reason. So that when the final option is developed, the taxpayer would come up to you and say, why did we look at such an option? You say we looked at it, but we didn't go down that path. It's that path not traveled. It's important to look at those, we think, as well, to say that we properly vetted them out. But once we get to those, we're gonna refine those a little bit more between November 2nd and November 18th. That's where we're gonna really start getting into some detail. And you can see between these scenario subcommittee meeting, we're gonna talk about that meeting in a bit. But in between meetings, we feel that it's important that our team was alone, that we have representatives give us feedback on the intern, because to wait 3 weeks in a short time frame that we have, I think we could be losing time, and we could be going down the wrong path. We just don't want to lose that time. So that intern feedback with the committee, certainly, Ben in the central office is vital in that as well, from a programmatic side as well, because that's the area we hear about it, we talk about it, but having that institutional knowledge of the system in those discussions. So we'll refine those, and we'll set up. We don't have we targeted some dates, but those are going to tweak depending on availability. But we think meeting weekly to refine those, the pros and cons. The meeting afternoon, we're not thinking about what they bring to us to say, hey, we got to think about this or that. We want to add it into there. So the November 18th will be. We'll transmit it that Thursday, probably before, a couple days before that, and really get some good feedback. And at that point, we would hope to have a pretty good list of 4 to maybe 5 options. Any more than that, it gets hard to really evaluate from more decision making, not so much for us, more decision making for the committee for that. And consensus, I don't know if I'd say approval, but maybe consensus of yes, these are options that we want Colliers and Malone to study a bit more. And that's where we start looking at the sites, looking at doing new additions to Highland. Here we were talking about, I mentioned that option. That might be one. We take a GIS mapping and it's all scaled. This is where we're going to launch a civil engineering and planners in there. We say, here's a space here. If you're just with this option, we're going to need another 30,000 square foot of space. We say, okay, well, maybe we need to do an addition here with the setbacks from planning and zoning. We're looking at wetlands. And this is all kind of at a high level for feasibility, but can we do it? And that's when we start getting into that. And then we start putting in what a lot of people are most interested in, how much it's going to cost. That's when we start doing a high low. It's going to be a range based upon prices that we've seen. And then ultimately, with all these options for every price, so each option's got multiple projects that we said that span out. We're going to span it out over multiple, probably, maybe you say 10 years, but it might be 8, maybe more or less, to span those out. And then again, that's where the committee's going to give us feedback. Does that make sense? We do 2 projects at the same time. South Windsor, we just finished 2 brand new elementary schools that some of you went to. And now it's advantageous to do the 1-2-1. But we're going to do those budgets. We're going to create cash flows over that 10-year span. And what it's going to do is it's going to give us a monthly estimate of what the town will be paying out on a monthly basis for design. We get a construction that obviously goes up. That's about 80% of your budget. Then between the phases comes back down again. And ultimately, you look at what's, one of the factors, not the factor, but what's your impact to the average taxpayer? How much your taxes go per month? That's one of them, monthly basis. So we'll be developing those. So ultimately, in December, hopefully the goal would be able to share some of those. And I think I said at the last meeting, we don't want to present those numbers too soon because that's all it sticks to. We want to make sure we vetted it out, that range. And we're not coming back when it's higher or it's lower, like why you tell us that in the first place. We hear that a lot. Things do change. And we'll put caveats on it, we'll put assumptions on there for these. But hopefully in December, we're coming to you with a range of costs. And they'll also include what we call district share calculators, what we estimate those projects to cost to the district, because you're going to assumedly get some reimbursement and submit grant applications for these projects, whether they're renovation or new. Those are the
highest reimbursement rates, we do alterations, we talk about eligible costs. But we'll do a calculation on it, and it's an estimate. There's a lot of variables that go into the final actual number. When you do audit on these projects, we'll assume certain amount of eligibles, we'll look at the reimbursement rate for whatever those years might be, you know, the range, and look what the net cost is for the program across the board. So I'm not going to go through that quickly, but these are some of the activities. And you may see some site plans that Mullen puts together with some rough ideas. I had to share that at the last meeting, but putting together, okay, like the elementary school, doing an addition, or if we're doing, new elementary, middle school, or option A, just in a high level form, we fit X amount of square feet on the site into playgrounds and bus circulation and parent drop off. So this schedule here kind of outlines all the meetings that we're foreseeing. That meeting December 16th, right before the holiday, really looking at those budgets. Now, as we go through these, things are going to evolve, and you may get to the point where like, wait a minute, we need to look at some more options before we get to that. I would certainly encourage, yes, we want to move, but I wouldn't restrict yourselves from saying we need a little more time to look at a few more options. This is a big, big program. These are big options to look at. They're very important. And don't be surprised by that. We wouldn't get this on our experience. You know, this is a pretty fast process that we're looking at. So I encourage you to take the time to look at this. And then hopefully coming back from January and the 20th, presenting to town council. Spec'd in there. I think we want to reach out to OSCGR when we get an idea of what those options may be. Because, you know, the program you see from South Windsor, they're on board with that program. They love seeing that plan. And the more you engage them early, the better input they're going to give us and either endorse it or at least be on board and say, hey, you're looking at it holistically. We talked about that the last time. We're going to have a holistic plan. We want to start engaging them at a certain point where they can react. We don't want to go too early, but not too late either. We want to get them in the mix and have an idea so they can be partners with you on the program. So that's maybe the kind of an outline, and this may move. It's a live document from here until mid-January. The next steps.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So last time we met, we had talked about having a couple of scenarios by early January, and then we were going to present our final selection by March 1st to the town council. I'm not sure how that lines up with I think I just heard you say that town council was the January 20th milestone here.
I probably the verbiage I have on there, Jen, is
Okay.
probably the wrong verbiage.
Okay. So
for
the
that.
plan is that mid-January, you're going to have January 20th, you'll have a preferred option, but we still have another set period of time where we're refining it and making sure that that's what we want to go with.
That is correct. That is correct. It's really for our goal to have an option to this committee,
Okay.
and then from there, you take it and we support you, obviously, with the town bodies.
Figure out how we need to present it to the town council.
Yes, correct.
Okay,
Absolutely.
and that's that March 1st date.
That is
Okay.
correct, yes.
So the option development and refinement is now through mid-January.
Correct.
Kind of
Correct.
settle in on what we think is the best option amongst this committee. And we're going back for that, get fed the information, town council, we're reaching out to the community groups, et cetera, going from there to present to the town council as our official recommendation in March.
Correct. Getting all the stakeholders involved. I'll change that to read.
There's a question from some more members, and I know it's in here, I don't have it in front of me, but I don't have my glasses tonight, so my age is showing. Where in the timeline do you need approval from the board on that? Because I'm sure there won't be any issues, but, for there to be an official Board of Ed building project, I think the board being plugged in here in meetings, we're all going on, but is there some kind of formal sign off that's required, is some kind of board or superintendent?
I think the idea of the committee is to Board of Ed is part of the option development. And our thought was during this January through March timeframe is when going back to the board with what we selected as the option as a committee for the body. So we don't need that before we go to town council
Right.
in March.
That makes sense.
I don't have an exact date yet, but,
Yeah.
March,
well, March 1st was the date to go to town council, but as far as going to the board, I'm not sure exactly what that date is yet.
Yeah, I think that's, certainly before it goes to referendum, before these projects officially goes to the town council, say, hey, we support this project. We are requesting the town council initiate this very cost-effective plan in modernizing schools.
Exactly.
I think the buy-in from the Board of Ed coming for an official referendum action.
I think if this plan is multiple phases, so you have the master plan as a whole, say, hey, this is the general vision of the town, and I say that, town council, board of that, obviously, all the bodies, but then it's the, taking that first phase, if you will, we don't know what that's gonna be yet. At that point, then it's really going to develop in that hard, total project budget that's endorsed, and forwarded, and setting a referendum date, the goal is for November of 2021. The statutes require that, you can submit a grant application by June 30th, but, prior to that, the governing bodies have to establish the fact that they're gonna hold a referendum by November 15th and report the findings in order to be on the priority list for December of 2021, and hopefully the following in 2022, have a grant commitment by the legislature. But those are some details we'll talk about as we go down, but it's a bigger bigger overall picture, and then that first project, 4 projects to submit grant applications for, and that's where working with the Board of Ed for the educational specifications, doing the estimates, submitting the grant applications, and there's a checklist that you submit.
Any questions from the committee? More questions? I think the actions required by the SMC covered. So we're going to item number 7 on the list. And Chuck kind of touched on it here, is this next 2 months is going to be very busy, where we felt we didn't want to waste time in between the SMC full meetings to define some of the options and go down a path that may not be advisable by the committee. So we discussed with Chuck forming a subcommittee that would help refine the options, help develop the options with Colliers on the intermediate to the full committee meetings, and kind of provide the update of where they went from the full committee meeting in between their meeting together, kind of refine the options and presenting what they've come up with. So formed a subcommittee, called the option refinement with Colliers. Renee, I don't know if you want to kind of give an update. Renee's going to lead it from the public side with Andrew Martelli from the Board of Ed reps on this SMC, and Sylvia Nichols representing the town council, kind of help with the option refinement development, bring it back to the full committee. So we're moving forward over these 2 months and not wasting time. So I don't know, Renee, you want to update your understanding, kind of where you're at with it, and what you think?
Yeah, so I think the goal will be, to have weekly meetings with Congress, so that we can steer them in the right direction as far as, whether or not it's no-go or if it's worth exploring further. More importantly, I see it more as a meeting between Colliers and the rest of the group. So I envision myself, Sylvia, and Andrew giving out from Colliers what their needs are. If there's any more decisions to be made, doing outreach to the rest of the group, make a couple phone calls, kind of gauge what their opinions are, provide some feedback back to quality. So it's just a matter of keeping the ball rolling and not having to wait 3 weeks to make smaller decisions that will prevent the process moving forward in an expeditious manner. We're looking forward to working with colleagues on that, schedule weekly meetings, and then after that, just hitting the phones and talking to people and providing feedback back to all.
We just had nothing else to do. We needed to keep our meetings.
Some meetings better than the works.
Okay, thank you guys for joining us on that committee. We appreciate your effort to keep this moving. Okay, item number 8, report from the communications subcommittee. Rich, how's it going?
Well, we've had one meeting. Remember, we only met here 2 weeks ago, so we did have one meeting on the 15th. Kate, Jeff, myself, formed the committee. We sent you a draft of what we put together at that one meeting. Started off by taking a look at the goals of the committee, the subcommittee, to provide detailed and timely information to all the Cheshire citizens on the work of the School Modernization Committee and its proposals. Provide information that will encourage enthusiasm and energy for support of the work of the School Modernization Committee. We went through and we brainstormed some of the target audiences that we would have. Parents, citizens, seniors, Cheshire businesses, because we knew that the kind of information we'd be sending out might be different depending on the needs of the various groups. And those key messages that are there are just kind of a brainstorm list. So as we looked at parents with students in the schools, what's some of the information they would most want to be able to get, citizens without students in the school, et cetera. So we put that together. And then we started to lay out a set of potential activities. And we're still just gearing up. Kate and Jeff are in the process of pulling in some information so that we can create some of the technology that we need, Facebook, Instagram, and potentially Twitter. And so we've laid out here some very specific ideas. We haven't decided how we're going to roll those out and which ones we're going to focus on first. But create a short bulleted summary of meetings that we put together. Those would go on the community forum, the education forum. People could sign up on our Facebook page if they wanted us to broadcast it out to them as a text message or an email. Do monthly letters to the editor. As I mentioned, Facebook, Instagram page that would be tied to a fairly simple web page. And we were talking with Arnett about some ways to possibly do that, either through the town web design web page, which is in process, or possibly our own. But we really don't want to spend a lot of time on web design. We really think that we can get to more people much easier through things like Facebook and Instagram. So the web page would be more a matter of a place to store information, stuff that somebody would see on the Facebook, they could click and it would take them to the web page and they could get more. We were talking about a series of either in-person or online meetings that could be done to contact things like the school PTOs, the senior center, sports organizations, etc. We took a look at or talked about some of the documents that South Windsor put together. They're clean, they're simple. Jeff shared one of them today. It's the sort of thing where you can take a quick look at these things and get a sense of what the whole proposal is. And then I had a meeting with Jeff and we talked a little bit about some of the work that had been done in the past to try to gather some people from town who might help to communicate out details of the project while it's in the referendum phase a point where the town really can't go out and be as active as we might want. So our purpose here is to make sure that, unlike the last time where it seemed like it hit the press all at once, a lot of people said, well, where did that come from? And where did that dollar figure come from? We really want to get a lot of information out in small bits and pieces. Make sure that people are getting invested in this and seeing the decision-making process as it's moving along. We have our second meeting next Tuesday, one of those, and we'll begin to start, laying out a little more meat, but that's where we're at. Did I miss anything?
So when you say that you're going to be posting on the Cheshire Forum and the Education Forum and things like that, I have been in the past posting our agendas the day of the meeting just to get people to possibly be aware of the meeting. Could we include that? And like, I don't know if you're planning on doing it or not, but just posting the agenda for this meeting so that.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't laid out yet exactly what we're going to do. We're looking at trying to get information out, as I said, it's small bulleted pieces. So for instance, a meeting like we had today, I would summarize it in maybe 4 or 5 little bullets that would go on there. I noticed there's a lot of, Tim White's here, he often puts things from the Board of Ed onto the community forum, the education forum, so that people would just see agendas and things like that. So, the same kind of thing, so that people in the community are just aware of them.
Aware of it and getting to watch the video of the meeting, and also maybe provide some comments.
Yeah, I think, it's great if somebody takes the time to watch the videos and stuff. We're not really assuming that that's gonna happen too much. We think instead, we would like to build an audience of people that can say, gee, after each meeting, I can spend 10 minutes and I can get a feel for what's going on. And we recognize that people are very busy, getting hit with a lot of stuff. Our own Facebook page would be a place where we could, begin to gather those names and get people tied in so that we can begin to get information out to it. But we started off with the assumption that there's too much information out there and you'll bury people. So we really want to, get it down to the easy, digestible pieces so that when you do go to the Board of Ed and you do go to the town council, a lot of people in town will say, yeah, I see how they've gotten there. I understand what this is all about, and that's all we're really looking for.
Okay, I'd like to also consider the other part of the communication where you are communicating out what we're doing to them. I'd like them to understand that they can communicate to us too through that public comment piece of it. So,
Yeah, we've talked about that. We want to make sure that is a positive process. As you know, a lot of times on Facebook and some of the forums, they can turn into people just, venting, and we really don't want to go there. But we have talked about vehicles for getting requests for information and getting that back out to people without encouraging that negative back and forth that sometimes is so prevalent with social media.
Okay, no problem. Anyone? Oh, go ahead.
Quick plug. Sorry. I need a shot collar, I'm sorry. I don't want to be disrespectful, I apologize.
We're still a little late to thing on
Still
this.
getting there. If I can make a shameless plug on Facebook, and Corey and the admins of the community forum disagree, but Cheshire Public Schools Facebook page is very, very popular. How many followers do you have?
I don't even know, we blew up.
There's thousands. I would also, if the committee agrees, and Jeff and Steve will give it, post some stuff for there too, because people follow that page.
Well, that's what we'd look to do, is to post on there, but also get them to like to our page, so
Yeah,
that,
redirect them there.
yeah, so that we're growing it.
We've noticed an uptick in
Go
our
to the
meeting
education
attendance.
forum, go to, various places.
Yeah, we've noticed an uptick in our meeting attendance since they've been posting the red meetings on the CPS page. So it's a good avenue, so thank you for putting this together. Looks good.
I'd just like to echo what Jen said about getting public comment back. I mean, I think it's crazy, we've been at this for almost a year, and we've gotten about 5 public comments. we get into these option developments, we may not like it, but people are gonna have comments, so even if it's, you know, what you consider venting, we need to hear that, because that opinion matters too. We don't wanna just, we don't wanna just corner, you know, people that are in favor of one thing or another. We wanna make sure we're getting a consensus of the public and how the public feels about different things, making sure that comment's given back to the committee, where none of that's happening right now.
Yeah. I want to be clear, we have no problem at all getting feedback from the public. We just want to make sure that we're not part of that stirring the negative pot that social media can become. And so, you know, we want to make sure we structure it in such a way that it stays at a high level, that it stays at a conversation of pros and cons and information, and not just some of the nasty stuff that sometimes can go on.
Yeah.
You know, that's not going to help anybody.
So we actually have a log of public comments from the entire year that we've been doing this, and there's 9 comments posted by 5 different people in the town.
That was close.
So you are very close. My point is that you are correct. There's a very small number. We are tracking them and making sure that we do respond to them. But I would like to get the public involved in being able to communicate their concerns, their questions. We can answer them and get the public involved. So
And I think that's the danger when we're meeting in a group like this for months and months, and we have all this information, we've been talking to each other, we assume that the public out there knows that. And other than an occasional article like in the Cheshire Herald or something, the vast majority of people really don't have a whole lot of, you know, information at this point.
yes, Adam.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I think when the plan is ready to go, you know, you said that you have very little public input right now. I think once the plan is ready and we've got all our ducks in a row, you know, every, you know, politician in the room and others involved, we all have our own Facebook pages. So I think that when the message is ready, I think we'll be able to amplify that, and that we'll be able to gather all that comment and input, and be able to sell the plan as best we can when the time comes. So just because there's 5 comments now, just because there's a select few that tend to amplify their voice or are very good at amplifying their voices, doesn't mean that we won't be able to get to the public.
And I think also, you know, where we talked about some of the different groups and going out to them and communicating with them, you know, I'm sure everybody around here would write down all the other organizations and groups that they're with. You know, we can begin as a communication committee, put together a packet. So if you're part of the Lions Club or something, you can take that as part of a meeting and say, can I have 10 minutes? Let me share some of the information that we have. So, and that doesn't have to wait until we have the scenario. I think we're more powerful. We can do that as we go along and get feedback from people so that they feel that they've had, you know, some input into the process. So we've got a lot to do. We just started.
And thank you very much for thinking about everything. Any comments on the committee? Okay, moving on. The next item is update on the SMC committee tours of schools. So way back in the January, February timeframe, we had scheduled all of these meetings at the schools so that we could get tours of the facilities. Obviously that stopped, and we haven't been able to start it again. I am assuming that we cannot continue those in person at this point, but I wanted to discuss the possibility of other alternatives, to be able to finish those tours, maybe in a video way, perhaps, or some other way, maybe smaller groups can go through. I wanted to just throw that out there and see if there's some way we can finish those tours. Anyone have any suggestions? Tony?
Good, good job, that's in the spot, I don't know.
Everybody got a staple gun?
I always would say yes. In general. So the administrative team has put in place video conferencing in some of the, I think 60, we're going to hit about 60 classrooms, 300 school districts to enable the hybrid model, you know, where we have a bunch of students that opted to stay homeschool, not homeschool, but remote learning, will still be part of the class remotely in your live classroom technology. Al has a way to maybe use that to illustrate some of the rules in the school.
Yeah, so, yeah, absolutely. On November 5th, we're holding our Board of Education showcase where you can see, I did reference that technology as part of examining this current situation and seeing how we can continue to evolve. The nice thing is that if we were to move buildings or any of this stuff is portable, we can take it with us. But so November 5th, there'll be a presentation of that, as well as celebrating a couple of our schools worthy of really tremendous recognition. But in terms of a tour, it's really easy for us, if you wanted more of a tour, to do that remotely, kind of lead a tour remotely. So we could project that tour into this room through Google Meet. And, maybe Ben and I and the principal are in another building, walking you through it. You can see everything we see, ask questions, hopefully would be like being there, without being there. I mean, alternatively, it's hard to social distance on a tour.
Right.
Unless we wanted to break it into 3 smaller groups that you should see the kids walk through the building. They do either zombie walk for social distancing or airplanes. You gotta stay that far apart, but, I mean, there are options, definitely.
Okay,
What
so
buildings did we not go to?
we didn't go to Doolittle, Norton, Hubbardston, and Darcy. So could we get those arranged, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a call, Jen, we can figure out how we want to do it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, next one is public comment. Ernest?
We have none.
Fine. I thought maybe after we just had that discussion. someone might have something in, but- Okay, so the next meeting, is gonna be November 2nd at 7 PM here at Highland School again. Maybe we might have a tour, to go through at that meeting, maybe not, we'll have to see what the timing is like. I do want to invite the town council, so just like we invited Board of Ed here today, I'm going to be inviting the entire town council to a meeting on November 2nd, to do the exact thing, talk about their information that they have for us, make sure that they're aware that we want more of a back and forth communication, establishing those roles and responsibilities and liaison type of thing, and get their impact, and their information about the financial piece of it. So, is Sylvia or John, would you be able to bring that back to them and invite them all?
I've
John?
already,
Oh, Sylvia's already,
Rob, alert.
okay, wonderful. The other thing we'll be doing at that meeting is reviewing the initial scenarios. You guys will have some initial things for us to look at as part of your presentation. And then the other option that you had offered was having Dr. Carter come visit us. Is that something we want to do at the next meeting? And have her come speak to us or give us her
Probably
vision?
future, I think.
I agree.
I think probably future, yeah, there's a lot of the agenda for the next.
I agree too, especially if we add a tour on. So definitely thank her for her offer and we will reach out to her soon when we have some time to get her scheduled. And I just wanted to say thank you one more time to Board of Ed for coming to the meeting today. I greatly appreciate your time and your information that you provided to us today. Thank you. Oh, Sylvia.
Before we adjourn tonight, I don't know if anybody else is having the same difficulty hearing in this room that I am, but your voice is very soft. I know you have. I had a comment from somebody who was watching it that said they can't hear it clearly online. So I know last meeting, and had suggested that we return to a virtual meeting. I'm not sure if anybody else is having that same difficulty. I'm older than most everybody in this room, and my back is killing me on these chairs. That's why I had to get up and move around, and I apologize for that. But I had a very difficult time hearing, especially if you were talking and you turned your head in another direction with masks. I'm not sure that we might not consider going back to a virtual meeting. I don't know how anybody else feels about that. Maybe I'm the only one. I'll have to go get a hearing aid. But
It was difficult for me hearing back here too.
I really,
I was trying, I thought I could most of it, but definitely.
yeah, but it was hard to get the nuances sometimes.
Yeah.
So, just a thought. So last week, I didn't agree with you. I'm having a workshop this week, so I agree.
So last week we had mentioned Marilyn appreciated being here in person. Is that still the case or do you prefer to go online?
Well, it is in a way, but I have noticed tonight that, people are talking that way and I have to record it here. and not everybody is speaking up enough to be able to take the notes and handle the tape recording. So
We could explore it.
Give or take.
Development, we could follow up on that.
Microphones?
Yeah, we have lanyard mics, I don't know if that'll work for anything, but I'll talk to Mike and we can
Okay.
discuss it, and then if we don't like the options, we can go.
Okay, so we'll leave that tentative then. Item number 11, the meeting will be the same time, same date and time. The location is going to be TBD based on whether or not we can get some more technology in here to be able to amplify this.
But thanks for considering it.
Is there no possibility of getting into, council chambers?
Council chambers is limited to the number of people that you can have, so we have to have just the board members and one other, be permanent or Jeff. Aside
We
from
can get more people in this room than we
Get
can.
more people here.
Did you guys do a meeting here, like, last meeting? That was virtual?
Last meeting was arranged differently in the table.
Right.
We were facing each other. We were facing each other last time, so people were talking at each other, and this time we have our backs to each other, so I think that's why people.
It's not going to.
Yeah, I think it's something we can do in the arrangement, it's just the number of people that we have here tonight.
I just remember watching it and being able to hear it. So,
Oh, that's good.
whatever that was.
There's less people at it, so we could.
Oh, okay.
It's because of the board of ed people that came here.
Because of you.
Thank you for your attendance.
Well, we also said it this way because we had
The presentation.
presentation. So for the next meeting, I mean, what we can certainly do is I can get rid of these tables. We could just have chairs for everybody. And then we could just form a giant circle, and if there's a presentation, we could kind of wing it that way and see if we can get microphones as well. Because I can tell these tables are just, not the tables, but it's actually the seats are just. They're comfortable for kids, but not for us.
Second grade.
Okay, any other questions on the next meeting? And with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Andrew, thank you. Second.